Welcome. You're listening to the Earth Conversations podcast, where we explore how to open up to the greater conversation with Earth herself and with our fellow co-inhabitants such as trees, animals, and plants through interspecies communication. In this time of environmental destruction, it truly is urgent that we begin exploring what Earth and her other than human communities are telling us. If you like to explore more in-depth material on this subject, please also visit our blog at earthconversations.org, where you can sign up to be notified through email about new podcast conversations, blog posts, events, and much more. We're excited and happy to have you join us for this podcast as we now go lie our heart at the ground and listen. Well, welcome, Eimear Burke, and thank you for being with us here today. It's so lovely you wanted to join us for this conversation.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
I am just going to introduce you. Eimear is the chosen chief of the Order of Bards, Ovids, and Druids, and lives in Kilkenny, Ireland. Eimear has a private practice of counseling psychologist, and her interests in Druidry and psychology have led her to act as a celebrant, helping people to design and enact meaningful rites of passage. She is licensed to perform legal weddings in the Republic of Ireland and can also offer non-legal ceremonies. Eimear has a deep love of the ancient Irish tales and has a passion for storytelling. She brings the old tales to new audiences and, while remaining faithful to the stories, often examines them from a new perspective so that listeners experience them fresh and relevant. She particularly enjoys showing people the sacred sites of Ireland and telling the ancient tales right where they happened. Eimear is also a priestess dedicated to Danú in the Fellowship of Isis. She is an arch-druidess in the Druid clan of Danú and a member of the Noble Order of Tara. And welcome once more.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
I invited you today because I felt this originality of having a connection to land in a way that doesn't exist many places, or at least many places in Europe today, because we often hear about indigenous people in Americas, both in South America and North America, or in Australia with Aboriginals. And so I wanted to try and invoke a more European ancient voice of connecting to land. But I think, to begin with, in your own words, what is Druidry?
Okay, so there's no one definition of Druidry. Each one has each Druid, I think, has their own understanding of it. For me, it's a nature-based spiritual path, which recognizes the interconnectedness of all beings. So it's not that we like nature, we are part of it. We are this big interconnected web. And it's about looking to the landscape and the seasons as a metaphor for our lives. And part of our training, and in the early foundations of our training, is developing our own inner world and our own inner grove, and stressing the importance of the need for a close relationship between our inner world and the outer world. So when our inner world is in sync with the outer landscape, then there's that sense of harmony and balance in our lives. And we do that by following the wheel of the year. So every 6 weeks, there is a festival to mark whatever it is that's happening on the landscape. So a few weeks back, we had Imbolc, celebrating the beginning of spring. And so in a few more weeks, we'll be celebrating the spring equinox. And that would be, in Ireland, particularly a traditional time for planting seeds. So we have a ceremony within the order of planting seeds. We actually literally in the ceremony plant seeds in a pot, but that is a metaphor for something we want to sow in our own lives. So every 6 weeks, there is a reminder of where we are within our own lives and where we are in relation to our landscape. I mean, that's just a small little bit, and there's more to that anyway. But that just starts it off. And you were talking about that nature connection, or that connection with the land. And it's about developing your relationship with the elements, with the seasons, and finding creative expression, finding healing, finding wisdom from the landscape. And it was just interesting, your comments about in Europe, how difficult it is for people to connect to the land. I was thinking about this last night when I was in bed. I lived in Dublin, which is the capital of Ireland, for many, many years. I loved it. I was brought up in a rural area where, as a young person, it was like there are only 4 roads leading out of the village. And that is all that you can say about my village. I thought I'd never get away to the city and to where all, the big life is and the action and all the adventure is. And I loved living in Dublin, and I thought I would never, ever go back to rural Ireland. And I was just thinking, I moved back here, 27 years ago, how I belong. This is not where I was born now. It's a different place in Kilkenny, but I belong here. And how, comparing how I feel now, I belong here in a deeper way than I ever did when I lived in Dublin, in a place that I loved. Simply because the landscape here speaks to me. There's green fields, there's trees, there's rivers. I can see hills in the distance. Now I have a sense of connection to the land. It's because I'm living in a rural area. And that's not to say people in the city can't, but it's much, much harder. And for me, living, my Druidry is easy to practice. I just go outside my door and I'm in a garden that's kind of wild. I'm near a woods. I overlook a river. All of that is right beside me. And then I can learn from the landscape and listen to it in a much easier way than I can in a city.
Yes, I think the reason why I started looking at Druidry was because I started realizing that there is something beneath my feet, actual in the land, trying to awaken in me in a different way than before. Because personally, and I think this goes for a lot of people, we've looked to, again, the Native Americans or the Aboriginals or even Buddhism or all of these traditions which had their originality in the way that they're told now, far away from the European continent, far away from what is actually under our feet right now. And I think that's why I came across you, because I started to listening to what you were saying, and how that Druidry has become a way of coming back into relationship with nature for local people, and how that your order is open to all kinds of traditions. Mm-hmm. You can be a Christian or a Muslim or a Buddhist or whatever, but it's open and inclusive in that way. And I think a lot of people, not just me in Europe, are lacking this deeper connection to the land that they're actually standing on. What are the whispers of this land? And because I have the same view as you, or the same experience as you, is that we are nature. I mean, my first contact point as a soul with nature is my body in reality. And we just forgotten that we are nature and we're part of everything. But in an increasing globalized world, I think we often can lose ourselves a little bit. So can you talk about the importance of locality and connecting to more originality in the land? And I also just want to add that when I've been diving down into the Danish roots, they're not too far away from the Irish roots. But I come across, first of all, this Viking, it's a very theatrical narrative and at the moment, with the Vikings. I suspect it wasn't truly that way all the time. And they truly did not look like that. Bikers and fancy bikers. But there's a need for it. What I see beyond that, all of this Viking imagery that is coming up now, is that there's a need for searching out something more local. And what I haven't articulated yet, or what I haven't experienced, which maybe you can help both me and other people do, is that there's a sweeter, more peaceful narrative, something more original before the Vikings that was present here and is still present in the land. It's sleeping, but it wants to come alive again.
Yeah, I think it's about finding your place in the world. And there's a guy called Bill Plotkin talks about finding your soul, and your soul is knowing your place. And when you look at the world as it is today, with all the conflict, it's around people not having their place or knowing their place or taking their place from somebody else. And knowing your place is not about hierarchy, that I'm superior to you and I'll put you in your place. And once we recognize that where we are in the hierarchy, we'll all be happy. I'm not talking about that. It's finding the place where you put your feet on the earth and you say, my soul belongs here. Not that it belongs to you, because too much of our history has been, I'm talking about world history, is this land belongs to me, or it doesn't now, but it will tomorrow, and I'm taking it. But it's about where I belong. And I think if we can find our place on the earth, if it's a tiny green patch, that's where our soul lies. And I think, and when we have that place, then there's that piece that you're talking about, that I don't know what motivated the Vikings or the Norsemen or whoever it was to go off raiding and things like that. I mean, it's not unusual. You know, it's all over the world. And I think that kind of attitude loses our connection with our own land. That thing about always wanting to conquer something else or somewhere else or other people and bring back treasure. The treasure is here, and it's about finding it in our own landscape. And it's right under our feet. And I think when we are so bedazzled by what's out there rather than what's here, we miss the magic in the simple things of, noticing a ladybird or a lovely colored hoverfly, taking nectar or pollinating a flower. Simple things, because that's exactly where it's all at. It's about watching them. I remember my son, who's now 25, my husband and I were walking through the park with him, and it was around this time the daffodils were in bloom, and he was a small child, but 2, able to see into the flowers and notice the pollinating insects inside the flowers. We didn't see it because we're above. And it's that magic and that ability to notice the magic around us, I think, is part of what land connection, earth connection, our own places, and how we can learn. We can learn from insects, how they behave. We can learn from plants. Like brambles, for example, could teach us how to set down roots, even in adversity, how that plant survives, is a robust plant. It drives me crazy in my garden because it likes to take over. However, it does endure. And about learning qualities from plants and animals, I think they're great teachers. And listening to the voice of the land. But that means spending time there. It's not about going out there for 5 minutes, or it's about really spending time and sitting there patiently and waiting for it to speak. It may not speak to you for a while. Mm-hmm. And in this modern age where I send you an email, I expect an answer very quickly.
Yeah.
Where everything needs to be quick. That this is around stopping, sitting still within yourself, and still within the space in which you sit. And I think there's a lot to be found there. And I agree, and there's so much here, wherever your here is, rather than looking to other nations, other cultures. They are valuable, but what I've discovered, because I spent a lot of time in Africa, is that indigenous worldviews are very similar to the worldviews in this land. It's just that the colors and the textures are different, and the names for spirit are different. But essentially, the principles are the same. It's about connecting with your landscape, honoring the spirits of nature, the spirits within ourselves, having ritual, having a community, finding healing in our landscape, finding wisdom, finding creativity in our landscape. They're universal themes. And they're to be found in Indigenous cultures. And somehow we have forgotten that with our technological world, but they're there. And like you say, that peaceful peace is sleeping. And I suppose it's a part of all of us that's asleep. When we look at why do people do terrible things, is it because they're evil or is it that they're unconscious? I think that's a more compassionate view to hold, that they haven't yet awoken, or they need to reawaken.
Yeah. I really connected with where you said that you have to go out there and spend time outside, because I think we've also a side effect of our society is we don't spend time. We've forgotten to just sit still and watch and be there and just listen and watch and not read, not listen to,
and not to be plugged in. Yeah,
exactly. But to be there, and it just struck me when you were speaking about that. It's just as a human relationship. You need to build relationship. It takes time. It takes trust before, the landscape trusts you and the animals there trust you. It takes time. And I was reminded, I moved here 4 years ago, and the place I lived before, I'd been there for 7 years. And one morning I came out of my door. It was in the countryside. Not many people around at all. And one morning I came out and I noticed the blackbird had a different sound for me. So I'd gotten my own name. And I was like, that can't be true. But I'd noticed cat, and I've noticed different, things, and what the blackbird was kind of announcing. They're the great announcers, I called them.
Yes.
And so one morning, this blackbird was suddenly announcing me, but with a sound I didn't know. But when I felt into it, I felt like that was my name. I was not just a human being anymore. I actually had a distinction because I'd been there, I lived there, I'd listened, I'd planted my feet in the ground, and the roots were digging into it.
So it's no longer an alarm call.
No longer an alarm call, just an announcement saying,
yeah,
she's outside now, there she is. It's like just an announcement.
Beautiful. And to discover that, the magic in that is just beautiful to recognize. I remember my husband and I went on a bird language weekend, and it wasn't to identify who was singing and calling. It was, what were they saying? And noticing the difference between a contact call, a begging call, an alarm call, because there's a predator underneath or because there's a predator above. And I've since then listened to ravens argue in the woods or call out to each other. So there's a chat, one calls, and somebody is maybe half a kilometre away calling back. And I remember listening underneath a big pine tree too, and they were arguing. And it was just fascinating to hear that, and to that they do speak a language. It's not just marking their territory, that they are communicating. And we talked about if you sit, when you walk down a lane and suddenly the birds either go alarming or they go silent, they're not used to people. And after a while, they get used to you. And it's just beautiful to see, just like that recognition. Oh, they know it's you. And they're announcing it. And they're not alarmed by it. I think that's just beautiful. It's beautiful. But the important thing is, I'm sure that happens all the time.
Yeah.
The thing is that you were aware of it. Spending the time to notice.
Yeah.
And that's the magic. And then once you start noticing, you can't unnotice. And it's just so beautiful to see all these things.
Yeah, and it really hurts my heart now, because I moved up here and I adopted a small cat. So now they actually call at me, even though I'm not with my cat. I'm a cat in their vocabulary, because I walk with her. We go for walks, and we have a very close-knit relationship. So suddenly I'm a cat, and I'm a little bit offended. But
well, you see, this
doing.
Is the thing. I've had cats. I don't have cats now, and I needed cats to deal with other little critters to help me manage the balance. but then they're not nice to birds. And it's that pull and that tension,
Yeah.
It's a hard one. It's a hard one.
Yeah, it is. But it's important. I mean, there's notice when I lived at the other place, it's been a journey for me. I moved out of the city, I think, in Copenhagen in 2008. And then I moved to a small apartment, but right next to a woodland. And that woodland was actually the one who took me on this journey of introducing me back into nature. And then I moved to the countryside and so on. So I've been a few places, but I've also noticed that, like crows, I would start noticing that the crows would also, you could hear when the fox were there because the crows would have a certain behavior, or you could hear when the hawk was there from the little birds, or even the crows that doesn't, they go berserk over the harrier. It's not tolerated in their territory. So I always know when something is up because I started listening that way. And I think it's a beautiful way of being a part of, even because that you can do even when you're inside, something catches your attention and you suddenly become aware of your surroundings outside. I want to take you back to a little bit about, because I heard you say in another podcast, and I think that's when I really stood attention, is that you can find the most extraordinary in the mundane.
Yes.
And my teacher used to say the same thing. And I thought, oh, there we go again. That's a recognition. My teacher is Sufi from the Golden Sufi Center in California. And he used to say, or he paid a lot of attention to that, being aware in your everyday life of, we do it through our breath, being aware of our breath when we cook and when we clean and all of these things. But can you speak a little bit more about the sensing of it? Because for me, it's very difficult to explain to other people of what I mean, finding the extraordinary in the mundane. Because again, we're looking for magic, and I expect this a lot in Druidry, because there's this whole Merlin story and all of the series that goes along and movies that goes along with that. But there's a sweeter, again, more silent way that is so much more magical, but less glittery. I don't know if...
Yeah, I get you. Absolutely. Well, it's interesting. The Irish word for Druidry and magic is the same. It's Druid. I was doing my shamanic training many years ago, and we were in, it was Loch Crew, Passage Room. It's not open to the public now because they're doing some repairs to it. Anyway, part of our task was to go on a journey down into the earth to meet the Cailleach, because her seat is just outside Loch Crew, that ancient site. And so I'm in there, and when I journey, I don't see in Technicolor. I'm fairly sepia and dull. And I'm frustrated because all I am is I see stones, dark, and it's earth. And I'm really, really frustrated. And I want to get down into the earth, blah, blah, blah. I want to see the Cailleach. And then the penny dropped. It's like, you're in the earth. You're actually surrounded. That's what earth looks like. And then I had a really strong sense of her around me. And it was like, wow. And at the end of our course, we had to say, to share one teaching, and mine was to find the ordinary in the extraordinary in the ordinary. I was looking for Technicolor. I was looking for some magical, I don't know what I was looking for, but anyway, a bit of glitter. And I didn't find it. I actually found what was there, which was that beautiful, dark, deep earth that surrounded me. And it was so comforting, because it's there. Well, my husband died almost 9 years ago. We had his ceremony here in our garden, and he's buried in the cemetery next door. And I thought when he was going into the earth that it would be a really difficult time for me, that often that is at funerals, when you see people, when the coffin is going into the ground, then it brings another wave of grief. And it didn't for me. It was relief. And I'm sending him home. And this is the last thing I can do for him, sending him back into the mother. And that was really profound. And I think the seed for that was sown when I did that journey in that passage tomb around connecting with the earth, going deep down in, connecting with the Cailleach, the crone, who's such an important force in this land. And ever since then, just spotting, noticing, I might notice the temperature, but I hear the bees and I go, oh, it must be 10 degrees. Just because I have bees in my garden, or spotting the magic in a ladybird. Or the first shoots. It's like, these are the heralds of what's to come in the next few weeks. And again, and that reminder of the natural cycle of life, you've life, death, and rebirth. And I always love that reminder, even though I know it. I've known it for many years, but each time I become aware of it, it makes me smile. It's a bit like someone you love and you smile and they say, I love you. And they've told you that many, many times. It's still important to hear it. It's still important to have that awareness or that expression. And so it's those simple things, or walking along you're in a town and there's a crack in the pavement and you see that little flower popping its head up. Those things. And they're the little messages of resilience, of stamina, of endurance, that even in this apparently hostile environment, life, love continues to grow and develop. And that's what we're all here for, is to give life, to live life, to die and to be reborn, and to honor life and honor that cycle of life. And it's there all the time. I don't know if that's answering your question.
I think it does. Yeah, it's the more, I think the more we speak about it, the more the people who are listening and myself will tune into the vibration of it and maybe begin to notice it, instead of having this whole disnification and about what magic is and is not, and It's like a nourishing meal. I mean, you can have something with with the beautiful dishes, which is lovely, and a nicely set table with the crystal and all of that, and your 10-course meal. Or you can have something like a traditional dish that is not sophisticated, and finding the nourishment in that. It's not all about the decor. And I think it's very nice to have nice tables. I'm not against that. But that, a nourishing bowl of soup that has everything in it that you need. And there's magic in that because there's sustenance and there's a simplicity in it. And in many ways, that's more achievable than having feasts every day. It's easier to make a bowl of soup every day and eat it. Yeah.
Likewise, the ordinariness and spotting it. Again, it's about sitting patiently and watching and seeing what you might notice. Because unless you do sit still, you don't notice.
No, and I think it's important, and I think it's an important practice for especially the times we're in. And I'm reminded of this tale also told by my teacher about, I think they were called the Sea Mokans, that under the big tsunami in Thailand, these were the original people that lived just on the coast in small huts, and they were seafaring people, and they noticed that the water was retracting in a way that they'd never seen before, but they recognized it from their stories that they had been told down through generations. And the stories said, when the sea does this, you go out to sea. And that's how they survived. And I don't mean to bring up fear and sitting still and, but it's this, I think, right now, with how crazy the world has become and how much knowledge, information that we're receiving from everywhere, I think the only antidote I've been able to find is sitting and observing.
Yeah. Because those people obviously had sat and listened to those stories, but they were also sitting there when they noticed the sea retreating, where others are busy, not noticing. And it's about being able to notice something that's out of the ordinary and say, oh, and then linking it to stories. And then, yes, The elephants went to higher ground. These people went out to sea, and that's the safest place with a tsunami is out on the sea or on higher ground. And but that's about paying attention, and it's about that stillness that then allows you to move when you need to move.
And you're a storyteller, so what is it the story does for us?
Stories. Stories do many things. A very superficial one, and still an important one, is entertainment. But I like to tell, stories from the Irish mythology, but tell them from the perspective of a female character in the story using her voice, because they tend to be very patriarchal. There's a role of a mother, and she gives birth to, and these become the hero. And you go, whoa, wait a second. That was a really important role that she played, and she gets one mention. So her voice, animating her voice, and something like, for example. But it's about, there can be huge healing, huge teachings, wisdom. Also, it opens up your own imagination, your own creativity. There's that soul connection with finding yourself in the story, finding yourself maybe in the situation, identifying with the situation in the story, or finding yourself alongside a character or a problem. That can be hugely enlightening for somebody listening to that story. It's about making these stories relevant to this world, to the modern world. And it's also about maybe being able to convey a message indirectly, that when you present a story and you're telling it as a storyteller, the listener is free to hear it and to interpret it in their own way. And sometimes it's much easier to hear a message through a told story than somebody's giving you the bold, raw message itself. And it also places the wisdom piece, the little kernel of wisdom, in a context that sometimes I think that may be more accessible to people. As if you have children and you want to share your wisdom and you say, do this and don't do that, blah, blah, blah. And they go, yeah. But then they hear those kernels embedded within a story. I think they're more likely to hear it and heed it.
It's funny when I hear these old teaching stories, I often don't get them until I get the translation from the person who's telling them. So it's a certain cultivation point within myself, and it's something I've begun to notice a lot, because there's something about the future that is very important, that we begin different narratives, even within ourselves. It's almost like seeking out the prophecies that can help us understand the future. Because the stories that we're in, the narratives that we live within, we're often not conscious of, but they're determining our perspective of the world, our perspective of this outer reality. And what do you, the women, I really like the women part, and maybe we could take it from the Cailleach, because you mentioned her, and there's just something there going, ooh, I want to hear more about her. And maybe I also would like to connect it to Bridget, because this is the time of Bridget, the triple. It's the only goddess I know a little bit now about, because my name is connected to her. My Brit comes from Bridget. So I've been told that story just in light terms, but who are these ancient beings, and how can they help us, come about new narratives and new prophecies for the future?
That's a very broad question. Just to go back a little bit, you said, your teacher you needed either to translate into English, or he needed to explain what the story meant because it was very obscure.
No, it's generally. I mean, I've been listening. I love Michael Mead and his podcast, and he tells stories. But if he didn't have the narrative beside it, I don't think I would understand much of the stories.
Okay, I think that can be the case, and I think what can be really helpful is that if you're listening to stories and then you have a conversation about those stories and what they mean to you, and then when you listen to someone else's perspective or their understanding of the story, it can enrich it, because I think stories have more than one meaning. In many cases they do, because you have different characters, and it's not, it may not just the hero or the protagonist in the story. What about the other characters? Maybe you identify with them. And I think having conversations around what the story means can be really, really helpful and enriching. So stories I tell, are the heroic stories, but I'm not telling them from the perspective about the hero. I'm telling them from an important female character, which is a completely different story. The facts are the same. Well, obviously I'm embellishing the facts as well, but it's a different emphasis, so you get a different message. And I think it's about finding. Okay, so many of our stories, and you'll say certainly in the Norse stories, with battles and who killed who and who won and valor and the glorious death and off to Valhalla with you, etc., etc. And we have a fair bit of that as well. And that narrative doesn't particularly work for me. And certainly there's no glorious deaths happening in the modern world. There's lots of death and lots of killing. And to what purpose? And it's about looking at the role of the mother in a story, the role of a druidess in a story, the role of a magical woman in a story, and just allowing her voice to come out. And you find that there are themes of love, grief, sorrow, joy, wholeness, acceptance, non-possessiveness, truth, deceit. All of those themes are in those stories, and then you can pull them out and make them relevant for today. So there's a story I tell of Care and Aengisog. Aengisog is the Celtic god of love, and at my weddings I tell that love story. And what I have picked out from that story is that 3 times he has to declare his love for her, and that he will never control her or possess her. He will accept her, because she used to spend half her life as a swan and half as a woman. That he will accept her as a swan and as a woman without no controlling her, possessing her. And that is a really important teaching for me around the love within a couple. That it's non-possessive love and accepting you for who you are. But in the story, that the first version of that, I didn't hear that. So it's about calling out, what do I see in the story? What is it telling me? And then calling that out and developing that further. Some are about grief and letting go and allowing people to, it can be about sacrifice, as in giving up something to allow your child to forge their own path and their own destiny. In many ways, that's what parenting is about grief, about the price you pay for love is grief. And recognizing that is a beautiful thing. It's a painful thing. But it can be healing in that it can ease bitterness and anger when you realize, actually, yeah, I am brokenhearted. And the reason I am is because I had such love. And then deciding yourself, is that love worth it? Those kind of things. And I'm now working on, peace stories, impossible peace stories, kind of tweaking the story about the battle and say, okay, was there another way? Could this have ended in a different way? And bring it around, because we are stuck in a narrative at the moment that somebody attacks me, I have to fight back, sword for sword, bomb for bomb, and it's not working. And it's only benefiting very, very, very few people. So we need to have another way, because, and I think when in our history, going way, way back, thousands and thousands of years, when the world population at different times decreased to a very few. But the survivors survived because they were cooperating, not because they were fighting.
Mm.
And people say, oh, no, we all fight, it's our way. It's like, we also cooperate. Fighting ends in annihilation. Cooperation ends in survival.
Mm. And we're finding out that in nature now as well, with the mycelium and the trees and all of these things that are now becoming apparent within the scientific worldview, that the Western world seems to have leaned up against and adapted.
And the funny thing is, we used to use the word fungus as a negative term. These people are a fungus on society, or this is a fungus because fungi are bad. And, they cause wood to rot, or they do this, that, and the other. And it's like, wait a second. They, that mycelial network is incredible, sending healing, communication, feeding other creatures. I mean, it's so rich now, and the intelligence within that. And it's that incredible cooperation, and that when you think of the mycelial networks, they're everywhere. And the mushrooms are just the little fruits that pop up. But underneath, there's a whole system. I mean, that is fascinating. How trees communicate. And it's about, that is the way it's going to be. It's never going to be one tree fighting another or one fungus killing another.
No. And this is also because the trees, I remember from the book of Peter Wolleben that, a forest that has been violated is actually not sending out good chemical endorphins for us to be healed with. So, and I think that got lost somewhere along the line as well, because now you see all of this forest bathing everywhere. And we have to go out into the forest and heal ourselves. And I keep reminding myself, thinking, there has to be something good about people going out into the forest. So don't get too alarmed. But it's this about me. Now it's a new resource. It's just a place you go to get healed. But we're kind of forgetting about the whole truth of that forest actually has to be in balance. And maybe if you open up to it and connect to it and take the time to get to know it before just going out and taking or expecting to receive, we've been amputated so much in this culture that we have to start to put the whole worldviews back together. And maybe that's where stories can help us, actually.
Absolutely. And I think your thing about connecting with the forest rather than just going and, I don't know, when people forest bathe, do they lie down on the ground? I mean, I go to the woods and I be with trees, so I don't call it forest bathing. It's just what I've always done. But actually, connecting with trees, finding a tree that resonates with you. There'll be some trees that, if you really listen, that they say, don't come near me.
Yeah.
Just like people do. And others you can feel a welcome. And share your breath with the tree. Share your thoughts. I do that. I sing to them, or I sing their song. And it's just opening up. I don't do enough of it. I have a busy life. I feel bad that I don't do enough of it. But it's having that and being so grateful, practicing gratitude for the trees. I was walking in the woods 2 days ago, and they're building a nice, a cinders path so that people who have mobility issues can go through it. But looking at trees and seeing the sick ash trees with the dieback, and then seeing a healthy ash tree, and then just wishing it resilience and hoping that it'll eventually, with time, overcome this awful disease that has come about in the last 10, 15 years or so. But I'm practicing gratitude. And just all of that, just connecting, just talking. I mean, talking about silently or however you do. And tuning into the voice of the trees. I mean, trees make different sounds. And I'm not talking about the wind and the leaves. I'm talking if you actually listen. But and that takes time. But it's about that willingness to have a relationship with, rather than, you say, going out, getting your hourly, your weekly dose of 1 hour forest bathing, but that it's actually going out to connect.
Yeah, and we've forgotten that, even our need for healing and everything else can be imposing and not benefit the whole. If you're taking without asking or being offered, it's not effectuating the right behavior or the right relationship. So there's another thing, because I found, and maybe this can lead us into the more unseen worlds and how Druidry is looking on that, or what the Druidry tradition is saying about that. Because I have a corkscrew hazel right outside my window. Oh, big, kind of curly old lady there. And it took me a while, but I suddenly realized that, and I've been trying to ask her or sit with it, but there's a part of the forest where I live that there's a lot of these trees, and I have to get out there. It's a little bit far out, so I haven't been out there yet. But I do think that this particular tree has a uncanny ability of serving as a communication connection between the worlds, because something happens where suddenly the doors open between the worlds and I hear things or something. And it took me a while to realize that, oh, maybe this is actually ability of that species. Or maybe there's something in that, the makeup of that tree, where the other worlds can communicate more easily. But what is, do you have any, do you have anything in Druidry that kind of goes that way of communication with other worlds, and other certain species that are more adapt to this than others? Or
okay, well, this world and the other world, very, very important. And a druid walks with one eye in this world and one eye in the other world. So yes, there's lots of meditation journeys to the other world. But I want to come back to your hazel. So is your corkscrew hazel a native form of hazel in Denmark?
I don't know.
Because I had 2 corkscrew hazels. I got them in pots and I loved the curliness. And then I moved from Dublin and I planted them in the ground and they returned to their old way.
Ah.
And I never cut when the straight ones came, I left them because I thought, I don't know if you've been restricted. I'm letting you do your own thing. Now, that's just an aside. The hazel is associated with wisdom. So we have in the other world, although there is a physical well here, the well of Shagash, or other known as Cunla's well. And around this well are 9 hazel trees. And from this well are 5 streams representing the 5 rivers of Ireland. We have more than 5 rivers, okay? But they also represent the 5 senses. The well is the source of all wisdom. Now, the hazels at Samhain the trees drop their nuts into the well, and the salmon comes and takes the hazel, and that is the salmon of wisdom, or the salmon of knowledge. And one of those streams is the River Boyne. And so we have in our mythology, a story, there was a wise man called Finneicus, meaning white wisdom, and he'd spent many years on the banks of the River Boyne. It had been prophesied that the fair-haired one who ate of the salmon of knowledge, when that person ate the salmon, there would be nothing that would be unknown to him or her. So anyway, there's a young boy who is studying with him who has already been trained by a druidess and a woman warrior in the arts of druidry, warriorship, hunting, etc. And he's going to be a leader at some point. Anyway, Finneicus catches the salmon, he gives it to the young boy, and who's to cook it, and he's warned he's not to eat any of it. And so the boy cooks it. It's on a spit, and it's just ready, and he notices a blister on the skin, so he bursts it with his thumb, but because the salmon is hot, it burns him, and he puts the thumb into his mouth. Anyway, he puts the salmon on a platter, brings it to Finneicus, and Finneicus sees there's something different about this young boy, and he said, "Did you eat of the salmon?" And he said, "No, I didn't have any of it, but I burst the blister with my thumb, and it burnt me, so I put it in my mouth." And he said, this boy had fair hair. You are the fair-haired one that this was meant for. and that your name is now Finn, and that was Finn McCool, who is one of our legendary heroes. And from that, he got 3 gifts: the Imas Forusni, which is the illumination of song, or that was the Tenan Loida. Divine illumination is the Imas Forusni, and Dichetel de Kenneth, which is extempore incantation. So all he ever had to do, suck his thumb, and all would be revealed. He also got a 4th gift, the gift of healing, that if anyone lay dying or seriously ill, and he went to a sacred well and carried the water to that person, they would be restored. So the hazel is another worldly tree. It's also here in this world. And it is the source of wisdom. It carries wisdom.
Huh. Oh, beautiful. And I swear that sometimes, because we have a lot of hazels here, regular hazel, and we also have walnuts, and we have so many squirrels. And I swear, because I'm like, I don't want to take it all, but I also want to wait for the nuts are right. And often I can see it on the squirrels, but I swear, because she doesn't have that many nuts, but I swear she makes them visible for me. It's like she can hide them and turn them visible. Like, because suddenly they're there, and they weren't, I would swear they were not there the day before, because you had to. And so it's like, here you go, here's one for you, and then the squirrel can have, and then suddenly I find someone else, like it's
beautiful. Because I remember as a child being out for hours on end, unsupervised, because I lived in the country, and going off to the woods and going there at autumn time, hazels, and then again looking and seeing nothing, and then suddenly, it's too late. It's just beautiful, beautiful. So we also have hawthorn trees that are associated with the other world, and the Sidhe, the people who occupy the other world, and they're portals between this world and the other world. And if you see a solitary hawthorn tree, you never touch it or harm it in any way, because bad luck will happen to you. And there's plenty of examples in Ireland where people have cut down hawthorn trees and bad things have happened to them. The rowan tree is a tree that connects the 3 worlds, the lower, the middle, and the upper world. It grows at the highest point, and it has beautiful red berries, and it's a tree that was also sacred to the Druid.
And the berries I think so.
Red.
Yeah, and it's very, the berries are very sour, but they're only edible after frost. But normally people don't tend to eat it, but the birds eat them. And at one point
Are you thinking of sloes? Are you thinking of blackthorn?
I don't know. I have to look it up. I don't have the vocabulary.
The blackthorn is they're like plums, small plums with stones in them, tiny. And they're very sour. They make your mouth. So they're only good after first frost. The hawthorn berries are very good for the heart. You can eat those, and you can make teas from them. You can infuse them in brandy or gin or vodka. Very good heart remedy. And then the rowan berries, they come out earlier, and so you harvest them before that, and you can make a jelly out of them. Yeah. But the thing in my garden, you're talking about your squirrels. The birds take all of my fruit. They don't share any with me.
Yeah, no.
I live in an oasis surrounded by intensive farming. So the word gets out, and it drives me crazy, because up the road, maybe 5-minute drive, there are rowan trees, and they're in berries. They don't eat those berries. They only eat mine.
Yeah. I wonder why.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
So
maybe they have good energy in the standing and have that nourishment of the soup, because they're on land that is respected.
Yeah, I just like a little something for myself.
Yeah, I know. That's why.
Anyway, I mean, I let them. It's like I'm not doing anything to stop them.
But we have hawthorn trees here, and I've actually been wanted to plant one in the garden. But I'll remind myself to be very careful before taking berries and asking permission from the Sidhe, because I don't want to crush them. I
have lots of hawthorn trees here, and They're very generous. It's a single hawthorn tree is the problem. So in Ireland, you might pass a ploughed field, and in the middle is a tree that hasn't been touched. So they plough around it. They don't interfere with it. They wanted to build a motorway in County Clare, and there was a hawthorn tree that was like a rag tree where people would come and leave offerings on it. And there were big protests because it meant the original plans for the motorway were to cut down the tree. Local people objected, so now it's around the tree. Because it was just the fallout would be just so bad. There's one story. John DeLorean was a car designer. He had his factory up in Belfast in Northern Ireland, and when he was building the factory, there was a hawthorn tree, a sciaca, a sacred tree on the land, and nobody would cut it down. And he said, "This is pure superstition. This is absolute nonsense." So he got into the JCB. He cut it down, and within a year, his business folded. And everybody puts it down to the fact that he cut the tree down. So we don't touch them, and people do at their peril. You know?
Yeah.
So the rowan tree that grows at the highest point. So it's that tree that links the three worlds, and it's sacred to the Druids as well. Actually, so many trees are. So the oak and the yew and the alder tree is a tree, as is the willow. They are very comfortable in water, so they are messengers between this world and the other world. And within Druidry, lakes and wells and rivers are seen as doorways into the other world as well. So we have many doorways into the other world. You know, it could be through a pond, a stream, a well, or trees.
It is a rowan tree right out here, and actually, it somehow it planted itself a seedling right on the other side, and I decided to leave it and let it grow up.
The rowan trees are associated with protection.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you. I'm thanking the trees also. But let's move a little bit further, because I wanted to ask you also the imagery. I've heard you speak about imagery and how you as a Druids use, let's see, there was two particular things, some inner grounding techniques, and also let's see what I've written here. Inner grounding techniques, inner groves. Those are the ones that I've heard you speaking about. And then there's also something about being aware of your light body, because in Earth Conversations, we've done journeys through our imagination and are engaging our imaginary powers and having that life come back in, because I think that's the original language of everything, and also how you connect between the worlds. So I'm interested in hearing the Druid side of that. So,
yeah, it's about awareness. So with the light body exercise, for example, it's not about creating light from the earth and bringing it up through your body. It's actually being aware of it. It's there already. We have a light body. We have an auric field. And it's about bringing that to your awareness. So starting with, the earth energy, and starting with the soles of your feet, and bringing to your awareness as you move up along your body. When I started that first, I thought, oh, I hate these things because I just don't get them. Just focusing on my breath, sitting still, being aware of my body for what? I just want to be out walking. I'm not a silent, still meditator. I'm none of those things. And then I got it. It took practice to do that now. And I wasn't doing it for hours on end because I don't have the patience to do that. But once I got it, it's like, oh, there's magic. And I'm so glad I persisted. But I did it because I was at workshops when we were asked to do it. I wouldn't have done it on my own. I just was so undisciplined at the time. And I'm so grateful that I had that and was told, no, we're all going to sit in silence now. We're going to do this. Because once you have that magical feeling, there's no going back. And it's all about that awareness. It's just shifting your awareness from me sitting in front of the screen looking at you, sitting on my chair, to being aware of what's going on inside my body and what's going on just outside my body, and increasing that awareness. And that is just, and that then that connectedness with the universe, and then being aware of that connectedness, and then being aware of nothing. And just almost like I don't know where my mind is. I mean, sometimes we often think it's in our head, but I'm not sure where the mind is located. I don't think it's in anywhere, wherever it is. But I'm kind of aware of. I think it's my eyes that are closed. That's all I'm aware of. I've lost sensation of my body, and that feeling, it doesn't last for long, but it is just wonderful because you're at one with absolutely everything, and there's such a. It's so healing and so grounding, even though it's centering. It's just it's a wonderful balm to the spirit, to the heart, to the soul, to have those moments, and then you're not alone.
I can almost sense it as you speak.
And I mean, I could see it watching your face. And I think maybe somebody else might listen going, this is nonsense. I don't know what you're talking about. And I know those thoughts because I've had them. And it's like trying to explain what chocolate tastes like.
To somebody who's never tasted chocolate, yeah.
And you have to have it, and you have to try it a few times and try different kinds of chocolate, and then discover the magic of dark chocolate. And the bitter chocolate and all of that. It can't be described. You have to feel it. Or love. Very, very hard to describe what love is if you've never felt it. Yeah, you and then each of us has our own experience of love in different ways. We all think we know what we're talking about. But each one of us, I think, experiences differently. And it's the same with our inner world, our inner grove. And it's about with your inner eye, creating that space, a grove, is trees, there's maybe a clearing in the middle, you might have a fireplace, you might have a guide, and that, is it daytime, nighttime, those kind of things becoming aware of. And some people say, because you use the word imagination, is this not just imagination and this is just me making this up? I think that's an understandable question, and I've asked that question many times. And now I don't ask that question because it's not important. It's what teaching am I getting? What am I discovering? What am I becoming aware of? What's the message in this? That's what's important. And, to get back to the stories, we talk about our ancient warriors in the past, and they are myths, they are legends. They're not, they may be quasi-historical characters. That's not the point. We're not talking about facts, we're talking about truth. There are truths to be found in story, in myth, not necessarily fact. And it's about not confusing the two. That you can tell a story that's all lies, but it's all about truth.
I just heard Michael Mead say the other day that all of what we call fact is actually a bunch of lies. And all of what we call lies, myth, and everything carries the truth. So
there you are. So yeah. It's that. And therein lies the truth.
Yeah. And I find this very important because there's two questions that I want to talk about here at the end. And one of them is what I find when I do journeys with people is after a while, and I've seen it happen so many times now. In the beginning, I can see, because even within the journeys, there's the extraordinary is in the mundane. The slightest thing is actually what touches you and carries the whole magic. And that has an easier way in the beginning of coming through. And then suddenly this happens where the mind gets overactive in the journeys, and it becomes the Disney story, or it becomes the Viking narrative, or you become the hero of, and everything is happening and there's this swirl. And this magic is still here, but suddenly it can't reach you because you're all consumed by the big, fluffy, glittery kind of magic. And that's one thing I want to ask you is, how do you counteract or balance that? And the other thing is this about dreaming, because I find the daydreaming, I'm becoming more and more pulled into dreaming and the active dreaming and conjuring up active dreaming. It might sound opposing to the other question I just put to you, but because I think that the earth is trying to dream of new imagery. I think she's trying to make a future happen that no one can see yet. And she needs us as human beings. That is our gold. That is our alchemy for her, is to help her serve that, saying we can trial and error through our daydreaming process. So first is the with the journeys and the overactive imagination, if you can counterbalance that, and then the other.
I wish I had an overactive imagination. I tell you mine, I'm very sepia. So I used to envy everybody with, being up on unicorns, up on the moon and the pyramids and all that kind of stuff. I didn't have it. It's. I think. So when we were doing our training, we'd do the journey and then we'd sit in circle and share experience. And I'm going, oh my God, mine was so dull. And then it becomes ego, because I'm really special because I saw this. I met Cleopatra and I met a Native American who told me I was blah, 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 blah. And I did this, and it's really profound. And then others looking around, oh my God, I haven't had any of that. I think it's getting your ego out of the way. This isn't about you. And it doesn't make you any more special because you can journey in a particular way. And I think once you can become aware of that, I think that stops the fluff and the glitter. And it's back. What actually is the simple message in this? And the technicolor is maybe carries the story, but actually it's what's in it is the important thing. I think that might help. I think the dreaming is really, really important. I don't know, there's a quotation of Einstein, if you don't have imagination, you've nothing. That's a really bad paraphrase. But he was, a scientist who honored and saw and recognized the importance of imagination. Because if you can't imagine, you can't know. And it's about playing with the extraordinary, but getting your own ego out of the way. It's about play. Unless you can imagine another world, like I was just talking about, I'm working on kind of impossible peace stories. And I've been reading children's stories, some really interesting ones. I'm going to adapt them myself, about swords refusing to fight. And it's those kind of things that can't happen. But remember, we had a pandemic a few years ago and the impossible happened, where planes stopped flying and all sorts of things happened that we said would never, ever happen. Things can. And but it's about playing with it in a fantastical way. That's how. It's about dreaming the world into being, and you can only do that by playing with your imagination. Yeah.
And I found out that recently, because I hadn't been aware of it, but I've daydreaming. I mean, there's what I call the higher imagination, or the mystical imagination, or the bridge, the imaginary bridge, which is where you're suddenly in another space and you're not aware of being in another space, but you're open to communicating with actual truth and other beings and realms and the earth. And this is where all of the communication, I feel, is happening with the natural world also. But then there's the everyday imagination, you can so to speak, where you can daydream, where you start off daydreaming. But somehow that daydreaming becomes a bridge into something else, where something then can happen and has this alchemical process. And I've noticed it a couple of times in myself that, for instance, sometimes I go we used to go on retreats with my teacher in Germany. And sometimes if I feel like I've lost connection, I need something to connect, I go there to sit in the courtyard in my imagination. And just to try and come back to myself and ground and or get that energy, connect to that energy of space within me. And then ever since I was a young child, ever could imagine, I would always daydream. And it would always be about wild animals coming to me for help. Like I would have to take out something from the poor or help them get their, cups out of something. Or they would come to me and I wasn't afraid of them. Everybody else would be afraid of them, but I wasn't. And it was just what I always, my go-to daydream. And then at one point, I found myself going back to this courtyard, and suddenly this great big bear comes out towards me, and everybody goes in and lock the door. But I sit in the courtyard and I help it with something, and it says, "Follow me into the woods." And so I follow it into the woods, and suddenly this big hole in the ground opens up in the woods, and it says, "Go through." And I'm sucked into this hole, and I can't remember what happened, but I had an experience there and everything else, and I came back out. And I thought, didn't think more of it that time, but it marked me somehow. And then a year or two later, I hear my teacher say that a Native American told him that his spirit animal was a great big bear. And my jaw just dropped. And that's how, I begin and initiate that daydreaming sequence. And then something else suddenly comes in and has a life there with me that goes on and then becomes a third thing. And I just love that whole universe. And I think we can learn to approach that much more carefully. I mean, we need learning stories about that.
I think it's wonderful because that's that thread that that's woven, that weaves that tapestry of what life is, and that interconnectedness of all things. So you start with a daydream, and that synchronous moment where you're hearing a story, etc., and then you're making other links. And I think it's around conversation, in not in an egotistical way, but listening to other stories and making those synchronous connections yourself. Like in Druidry, the purpose behind the inner grove is that you may not always be outside, but that wherever you are, your grove is there. And it's about being able, and then finding, because you can go looking for help in the other world, to receive wisdom or teaching, and it's there ready to hand. And then, I mean, there's so much synchronicity. I mean, Druids talk about this all the time, that just like what you've experienced there, it's a common experience. And when we do ritual, you're in the east and you're calling on the element of air, and then suddenly the flock of birds go right by. Or I remember years ago, we were doing a full moon ceremony and it was cloudy, and we were in a circle out in a grove, and then we faced where the moon was and greeted the moon, and with that, the clouds parted. Those kind of magical things that, when we're in touch and in harmony, things happen. So your daily imagination, your day, and that journey, and then hearing that story, that the threads just begin to line up. You can't plan it,
no,
but it works from the practice that you have, whatever that practice is, and then being open and aware, and then these magical moments happen. It's beautiful, but yeah, you can't plan it. You can't summon it, with your wand and insist. It's at the right time. These things come, and they're to be treasured and valued.
And I think, the whole point, and this may sum up our conversation, this story, and then, how you said, you can't plan it, but I think we can make ourselves available for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, you can lock yourself inside and never go out, so you meet nobody. Or you can go out every day and be open to what.
Can I ask permission to, because I've just started a Patreon site where one of the gifts that I do every month is offer up a new visualization for the Patreon members. And within interactive guided imagery, I've been trained to do a safe place, to have an inner safe place, go to in a safe place. However, whether it's a place in this world or in another world or, imaginary, however that look. But I also know from myself and from others that the word safe, actually quite a few people don't know a safe place. This is where psychology comes in. So that can be a trigger, because and you affect the sympathetic nervous system, because I don't have a safe place. What do I do? And now I'm reminded of never having a safe place, and that can go into trauma. And, so I've not been wanting to do that. But can I use your sacred grove? Because I actually thought, that I could do. Find a sacred grove and, and do an imagery or a visualization about that. But I don't want to do it without asking your permission of using that sacred grove imagery.
What we do when we share with non-members is going into the forest and finding a clearing in the forest. So you're at the edge of the forest. You see a path. And then part of that is noticing, the earth beneath you, feeling the earth energies beneath your feet coming up into your body, focusing on the sky energies, bringing them down. And then you have the earth energy and the sky energy meeting within the center of your being, feeling every cell of your body, noticing the textures, the smells, the taste of the air, the colors, the sounds coming into that clearing. And then that person can describe what that clearing can be however they see it. There may be a fire there may be a guy there, or maybe there may be an oak tree, or there may be another tree or a little bush or whatever it is. And that is their place. So it's going into the forest, and then there's that clearing, like that beautiful hearth space that you can create for them.
That also leans up about towards my last podcast with Matilda Denning, who's an animal communicator, who also came up with this. It's a very ancient, very universal language, because she came about through her imagination to have this path into a clearing where there's a stone, where on each stone in this clearing, because she's doing animal communication, each stone is occupied by an animal there. And then there's one stone left free, and that's for you to sit down and then communicate and engage that. So that's a very universal thing, and beautiful. Thank you. So, Eimear, I think we're well upon the hour. Is there anything that you would like to share with people at the end? Anything you're doing at the moment? Anything, it could also be words of wisdom, anything.
Well, if people want to know about Druidry, our website is www.druidry.org. That's the OBOD one. My one is kilkennydruidry.com. And every 6 weeks, we have an online ceremony that's open to everybody to mark the wheel of the year. So the next one for the spring equinox, we call it Conach Bonari in Ireland, and Alban Eilear, it's the Welsh. And that's on the Saturday the 23rd of March at 7 p.m. UK time. So it's 8 p.m. Danish time. So people, that'll be on Facebook, OBOD Facebook, or my YouTube channel, Eimear Burke, or OBOD YouTube, or Philip Cargon, my predecessor. And that is there. And then I do a fireside chat every Thursday at 8 p.m. UK time, where I interview a member of the order, and that'll be found on Facebook and also on YouTube. And then Philip, my predecessor, he holds a tea with a tea with the Druid on a Monday at 8 p.m. UK time, which is, he does a talk for 10 minutes and then a meditation for another 10 minutes, something like that. So we're active within the order for members, but also for the public as well.
Okay, good. So I will leave all of the links below to what you've just mentioned. So people who are interested and want to search out this way of life and connect more with nature through this way of life can easily find you.
Yep.
So I want to thank you so much for coming and joining me today. It has been absolutely lovely
to meet you. For me too.
Thank you very much.
Not at all. You're so welcome.
Thank you for listening to the Earth Conversations podcast. If you'd like to explore more in-depth material on how to open up to hearing the conversation that the Earth is trying to have with us, please visit our blog at earthconversations.org, where you can also sign up to be notified through email when new podcast conversations are ready, along with new articles and events. We would like to thank you for taking the time today to open up to the heart of the Earth and her ways of communicating with us. It is our sincere wish that you will tune into this greater conversation that she so desperately seeks us to have with her at this moment in time. To find the track to the wonderful music that underscores this podcast, simply follow the link below to iTunes or Spotify. Please take good care of yourself and the Earth, and until next time, go lie your heart at the ground and listen.
É terra, é mar, é vida infinita, é amor incondicional, é abraço apertado, carinho sempre dado, o aconchego no colo e o alimento no peito. É vida infinita.